Now, back in 2018, there were a lot of leftist politicians, agitators, that were encouraging people to do socially unacceptable things. Maxine Waters comes to mind, a Democrat who's basically suggesting that protesters should harass Republicans whenever they see them. Like if you see them at a restaurant, you form a crowd and you push them back, I think was her quote. And AOC herself is basically saying that activists are supposed to make people uncomfortable. They are supposed to take that discomfort with the status quo and advocate for concrete policy changes. Popular support often starts small and grows. To folk who complain, protest, demand, make others uncomfortable, that is the point. And I remember, like, at the time, because I'm coming from a country where people don't do this, I was basically pointing out if you normalize this, it will be used against you. The reason we have principles is not so that we can have the principles loom over us and forbid us from behaving in a manner. It's like, no, you have principles so that you defend others, that when it's your turn, you get defended by them, right? So it's basically like setting a goal. It's like, okay, well, you don't do this in a society. AOC disagrees with this, right? Like she's like, well, if it's effective, it works, then why not do it? And now it's being used against her, right? So she was watching a movie at a cinema when protesters did exactly what she said that leftist protesters should do, and started making her uncomfortable, right? So here is her reaction.
Cut it, and you're going to cut this, and you're going to clip this so that it's completely out of context. I already said that it was, and y'all are just going to pretend that it wasn't over and over again. It's fucked up, man. And you're not helping these people, and you're not helping them.
You refuse to.
You're not helping them.
So what I noticed really interesting is the wild gesticulations that she is doing. Like, it's almost theatrical in a way, but I always found it triggering. It's almost every single member from the squad does it. Sometimes even more exaggerated than now, almost like a child stomping and, you know, flailing their arms very theatrically. And now I finally realize why it's triggering me. It's reminding me of the evangelical preachers, like the firebrand preachers from back in the day when I went to high school. And I went to an evangelical high school. It's very rare to find one of those in Romania, but like that's what I did. And it reminds me of that. You know, like those pastors that had like this specific way of gesticulating and doing like these theatrical demands and condemning people and basically saying you're a sinner and he's a sinner and, you know, like that type of stuff. So what is interesting is that the protesters in this situation, which seems to be masked up as well, they were doing the weird hand gestures as well. Like they were almost mirroring her. Like they were almost copying everything that she did. And her answer was to amp up more of the same. But it was such a fascinating social experiment because at the end of the day, you know, like this doesn't change anything. Like unless, like if you want her to change her mind, pay her more than the people that pay her. You know, lobby her. That's what the Americans use the word, lobby her, right? So lobby her harder. If you lobby her harder, then she changes her mind. Milton Friedman actually says, like, there is no such thing as a good politician or a bad politician. You cannot convince, like, bad politicians to be good. But what you can do is to make it profitable for politicians to do good. The moment it's profitable for politicians to behave in a certain way, they will behave in that way. It's not just Milton Friedman that said this. It was also Ricky Gervais at the Oscars, you know, where you have all these woke artists and actors coming up and saying, oh, you know, we need to be more inclusive, more diverse, blah, blah, blah. We need to care more about the marginalized and minorities and do more in order to combat sexism. And Ricky Gervais goes there and he says, you hypocrites, if ISIS had a streaming service, you would call your agent right now. Like what happened? You're talking about how evil America is and blah, blah, blah. But if ISIS had a streaming service, you would call your agent right now. It's the same thing with politicians. Like, if you pay them, they will do what you want, right? So the protesting on the street and doing all of this is ineffective. Just raise more money and pay her more. Now, the thing that's taking place here is the civil war on the left. And this is caused by woke ideology. Elon Musk said about this a little bit, and immediately the ADL cracked down because, again, like, you don't want the guilty party to assume responsibility that they caused this shit. So what is the shit that was caused? Well, in universities, students have been lectured for the last decade or so that capitalism is evil, cisgender, straight, white normativity is bad. Like all of these things, decolonizing is important. We need to care about the indigenous, like all of the stuff that comes under the umbrella of what people now call woke. And then when you have a conflict in the Middle East, they're looking at Netanyahu and they're like, well, he's pretty white, isn't he? He's pretty straight and cisgender, isn't he? And he runs a capitalist nation, doesn't he? So why are we supporting this? Like, we shouldn't support, like, capitalism, right? We shouldn't support, like, straight, white, cisgender. Now, I have seen on the internet, like, people trying to move away from this and be like, well, yeah, but, like, he may be straight, white, but, like, they're Jewish. And it's like, you indoctrinated students in the academia, and they don't matter. Like they don't see the difference. They're eyeballing it, basically. Like, they're not doing 23andMe DNA tests. They're eyeballing. If it looks white, it ain't right. Like, if it looks white, it's a colonial person, right? They don't care if I'm from Eastern Europe, from Romania, if my ancestors never had slaves, right? The moment that I go into the United States, the woke students are going to classify me as white, and they're going to say that I owe reparations. Period. Right? Like, they're eyeballing. That's what you train them to do. So, it is no surprise, it is no shock that when you see the conflict in the Middle East, there's now a huge civil war on the left. Like, people that don't agree with the policy, and we see this everywhere. In Europe, it's a little bit different. In Europe, it's actually driven by the refugees, because if you import people from the Middle East, well, they're going to bring their culture and the problems that comes with it across the border. It's not like the border automatically, when you pass it, it makes you forget where you came from. And the parents are going to teach their kids the same stuff. So what you're going to end up with is Mr. Galloway, that one in the UK. Same thing, it's, but anyway, what we see here is very interesting. Is the same tactics that were used on the right now being used on AOC herself. And I expect that we're going to see more of it. But what probably scares her the most is that she's going to have less people showing up to vote. This is what happens in Britain as well, when people feel disenfranchised, right? Because, again, her policy, like, if she was actually coherent with her ideology, yeah, she should do what the protesters are demanding her. Like, it makes sense if you look at the leftists on Twitter, like, not part of the establishment. If you look at Twitch, if you look at Vosh and Hassad and all the other leftists, they're basically with the protesters, right? So like, if they're not going to be represented, they're not going to go to vote. And if they don't go to vote, well, AOC may lose her seat. And I think, like, this is what she needs to think about it. This is what probably keeps her awake at night. Usually politicians don't care about human lives and suffering. It's just like percentages on a piece of paper that they sign. But they do care about keeping their seats. And I don't think they're happy with what they're seeing. Let me know what you think. And as usual, I will see you in the comment section. Take care.